Good morning, Morai v'Rabotai, Bruchim Abayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Nun Aleph, Amud Aleph, on the bottom of the Amud, third wide line, starting the new Mishnah. Today's Amud is being learned as a Zchut Refuah Shelema for Rachel bat Edna, Michael ben Nahid, Esther Bracha bat Chaya, Avraham ben Tashgol, and Chaya Rafaela bat Farah, and especially dedicated for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha bat Nahid, should all have a full recovery. Refuah Shelema, Amen. This one is also being learned as is Chut Aliyat Neshama for Jacqueline bat Avraham and Abdas. Neshama should have an Aliyah. This week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by a Shea family, Kohen family, and Dayan families. It should be an ultimate Zchut for all of their mishpachot. Amen. So we are starting now, really, what the Perek set itself up to discuss, the mitzvah of Simchat Bet HaShoeva. The mitzvah that they did 7 nights, or perhaps 8 nights of the Chag, the Machloket Tanaim that we saw already. Rabbi Yehuda says that even on Shmini Atzeret you had this mitzvah of Nisuch HaMayim. So Nisuch HaMayim was accompanied with a tremendous simcha that we mentioned. It was called Simchat Bet HaShoeva, Simchat Bet HaChashuvah, this pouring of the water that they would bring early morning of every day of the Chag from Me'ashloach, and they would bring it to the Beit HaMikdash. So says the Mishnah, Mi shelo ra'a Simchat Bet HaShoeva, lo ra'a Simcha miyamav. If you did not see, if you didn't experience the Simcha of Bet HaShoeva, you have never seen Simcha in your life. Says the Gemara, what the Mishnah, what did they do? B'motzai Yom Tov HaRishon Shel Chag, Motzai Yom Tov HaRishon, they would go, Yardu le'ezrat Nashim. They would go down to Ezrat Nashim. Now, Ezrat Nashim is the first area that you would enter when you came up from Har HaBayit. There was Ezrat Nashim, and then there was 15 half-circle steps that would take you up all the way to Sha'ar HaElyon, to the upper gates, which was also known as Sha'ar Nikanor, and that would open to Ezrat Yisrael, which was a narrow area that the Jews still could stand. Right on Yom Kippur, that's where they would stand. It's like 11 amot wide. It's not that wide, and then that would be like, leading to the Duchan, where the Levi'im would stand on regular days to sing and to play the musical instruments. And then after that is Ezrat Kohanim, which is the area of the Mizbeach, and after the Mizbeach is the steps to actual Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim. That would be the area of Shekhinah, so to speak. So that's the Ezrat Nashim is the first area that you would enter in the structure of the Mikdash. So they would go down to Ezrat Nashim. That means they would be going down from Ezrat Yisrael through Sha'ar Nikanor down to Ezrat Nashim. Ubetakerin sham tikun gadol, and they would make a fantastic tikkun, fixing. The Gemara is going to discuss this, what exactly the tikkun is. This actually becomes the source to the whole concept of mechitza in the shuls, this Gemara, because the people would come to watch this, and women and men alike were participating in this. And you can imagine the area of the Beit HaMikdash is not that large, and everyone is there, and they created a separation for man and woman, as the Gemara is going to discuss. But this is Betakerin Sham Tikun Gadol. It was a tremendous tikkun that they did, says the Gemara. And then menorot shel zahav hayusham. How did they light up the place for all these participants? They had massive candelabras made out of gold. Ve'arba'a sfalim shel zahav beroshem. They had, for each one of these menorahs, they had 4 large vessels on each corner of them. They had 4 sides, and on their top head. Arba'a sulamot. This is again, these pails were 30 logim. It's tremendous amount of fuel in each one of them. Ve'arba'a sulamot lekol echad ve'echad. Each one of these poles of light that had 4 heads. So there are 4 of these poles. Each one of them has 4 heads with, pails of massive containers of fuel, and each one of them had a sulam, had a ladder that would lead to them. Ve'arba'a yeladim miperchei keuna. Young kohanim, 4 young kohanim would go up ubidehem kadim shel 120 log. They would have these massive jogs of 120 logim. Shehen matilin lekol sefer vesefer. They would pour into these pails, filling them up with the oil, with the fuel that they needed. And then mibelaim yichnese kohanim umiyehem yenehem, from the old garments of the kohanim, their michnasayim, which was like a short pants that they would wear on their ketonet, and from their the material, the old belts that they had. Mehen hayu mafkiin, from them they would cut away. Again, instead of trashing the bigdei keuna, which were made out of simple white pishtan, bigdei pishtan, instead of trashing them, they would make psilot, they would make wicks from them. Hayu mafkiin bahen hayu madlikin. They would be used for actual flame, that they ptila basically. But you're talking about massive torch here. The Mishnah is going to explain how large of a thing this was. Velo haya chatzer b'Yerushalayim she'ena me'ira me'or bet hashoeva. There was not a courtyard in Yerushalayim that didn't get lit up from this flame that they had in Beit HaMikdash. Now this is tremendous. The Gemara is going to speak about the details of this, how literal this was. Can you clean your your rice in the light of such a flame? The Gemara is going to talk about the details of how light was this light. But you have to ask yourself, because the Gemara in Masechet Yoma, Daf Tedvav Tetzayid, discusses the walls of Azarat. The walls of the Har HaBayit were pretty tall. The doors of the Beit HaMikdash were 20 amot tall. So it's like massive. 20 amot is 10 meters. It's big. You talk about 30 foot tall, and the walls obviously were taller than that. The Tosafot Yom Tov in Yuma over there says that the walls were 50 amot, so Shan says they're 100 amot. That's like really, really tall. This is like 150 meters. That's like 150 feet tall. So how did you see these from across walls that tall? Now I understand that Har HaBayit goes up, and the Beit HaMikdash is the tallest area. So Yerushalayim is lower than Har HaBayit. So, and these poles by themselves were 50 amot tall. So you're talking about like a 75 feet pole, and they're pretty tall. So the real way that Rashi over here explains it is that the one side of the Beit HaMikdash that was basically facing Yerushalayim was a lower wall, and that was the Kotel of Shar HaMizrach. The Kotel of Shar HaMizrach was only 26 amot tall, and the reason that they made it so short, so much shorter than the other sides of the walls of Har HaBayit, is because the Kohen that would do the Para Aduma, in the process of doing the para, they had to be able to see from where they are in Haras Zetim, to be able to see through the gates of the shard that we spoke before. They should be able to see the Kodesh. And therefore, the only way, and the Gemara Midot actually cheshbons all the nitty-gritties of every amah and every inch of how this exactly worked, but that has to be much shorter in order to enable for that. And that's how the light would spread through that shorter wall into Yerushalayim. But you're talking about like a massive amount of flame on top of these poles that would lit up the town, basically, the small town of Yerushalayim from Simchat Beit HaShoeva. Now, what was the process? Chasidim ve'anshe ma'aseh hayu merakedim bifnehem be'avukot. Chasidim ve'anshe ma'aseh, they would be dancing in Ezrat Nashim in that way. Now, this means that not everyone that wanted to come and dance would get to dance. Now, it was not free for all. It's not that they would bring people, or whoever could be making fancy moves would get in the middle. It was only miyuchad for Rashi Yeshivot. The Ritva writes it was for Rashi Yeshivot and the people of Sanhedrin. This was a very special simcha of Torah. Now, the Ritva writes the reason that this was so specific was because they wanted to show this is not simchat bachurim. This is not just some jokers getting in the middle, having a little shot and dancing. You can't have that in the Beit HaMikdash. In any case, but it was the simcha completely emanating from the connection with the Torah. This actually happens to also be very intrinsically meaningful, because the real true simcha comes from learning Torah, right? Sas anochi al imratecha kemotze shalal rav. The continuous simcha. We spoke about the fact that the Vilna Gaon differentiates between the sason and simcha, right? And sason is a continuous simcha that the person intrinsically attains, and that comes from Pikudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamechei Lev. The true simcha is not a temporary something that you drank, or you heard a nice thing, or you got excited. It's a simcha that does not come from outside in, but from inside. It boils and overflows to outside, and that intrinsic simcha is from Pikudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamechei Lev. So therefore, it's very meaningful that the people who were source of this simcha, they were the ones who were overflowing with Torah, the Rashi Yeshivot, the Anshe Sanhedrin, the biggest of the Chachmei Yisrael. They were the ones who were in charge of this night-long simcha of Simchat Beit HaShoeva, and they were actually pretty capable as well in this way. They would be merakdim bifneim ba'avukot. They had torch throwing, activities. Shel or, they had these torches of flame that would throw and juggle. The juggling, says Rashi, was zorkinotam klape mala or mekabelinotam. Some people would do it with 4 torches. Some people would do it with 8 torches, depending on what they were used to and what they were capable of. שבקהילה לעשות כן ב4 אבוקות או ב8 וזורק זו ומקבל זו וזורק זו ומקבל זו. They were juggling these torches, they were dancing and so on. ואומרים לפניהם דברי שירות ותושבחות. They would be saying דברי שירות ותשבחות, which we're going to see in the Gemara what exactly they were saying. The Hasidim ואנשי מעשה who were dancing in the middle, והלוויים בכינורות ובנבלים ובמסלטיים, and the Levim also were not just sitting around, they were playing all kinds of instruments, of the harp and the violins and all of the amazing instrumental music that you had in the Beit HaMikdash. They were all at play in the night of Simchat Beit HaShoeva. ובכלי שיר בלא מספר. There were no specific number of how many pieces of musical instruments you had there. Unlike the korbanot, that there are specifications for what exactly has to be played and so on. Over here is kind of like free for all. The more the better. There's no specific number of klei shir, of the musical instrument pieces that you had over there. Al 15 ma'alot hayordot me'ezrat Yisrael. And where were the Levim standing? They were standing on the 15 ma'alot, the 15 steps that would come down from Ezrat Yisrael to Ezrat Nashim. The 15 half-circle staircase that was going up from Ezrat Nashim to Ezrat Yisrael. That's where the Levi'im were standing on Simchat Beit HaShoeva. This is not obviously the regular stand of the Levi'im. That's not where they would stand. The real place for Levi'im on a daily basis is the Duchan. And the Duchan is the two steps, really, the defining line between Ezrat Yisrael facing the Mizbeach, going into Ezrat Levi'im and Kohanim, would be the Duchan that people would be standing on, the Levi would be standing on, based on what we said the last shiur of the three-way machlok in the Mishnah in Masechet Erechim, where the Avadim, where the Israel, where the Yuchasim, where the Levi'im, but that's where the Levi'im would sing and the people would play the instruments. But here in Simchat Beit HaShoeva, they are completely in a different place. They aren't in Ezrat Yisrael, they're in Ezrat Nashim, standing on the 15 steps and singing and playing the music. Now, this is very special because it says Ve'omrim Shira, they would be saying Shira, and the Shira that they would be saying is the Shir HaMa'alot, the 15 Shir HaMa'alot that David HaMelech says in Tehillim, between Perek Kuf Chaf and Kuf Lamed Dalit, those 15, all of them start from with Shir HaMa'alot or Shir HaMa'alot, same thing. That David HaMelech said this actually, this is the Maharsha explains this, others as well, in a deeper sense, that these 15 is very much meaningful because it's not just that there are 15 steps and there are 15 Shir HaMa'alot. These 15 steps were built because of the 15 Shir HaMa'alot that David HaMelech said, right? These steps that the Levi would stand on. If you take a look, that the Rashi explains the size of the Orach HaMa'ala Berochav HaAzara Verochav HaMa'alot Chatzi Ama Verubo Chatzi Ama, right? This is all in Masechet Yuma, Masechet Midot, but says Rashi, the shir that they would say would be L'Simchat Beit HaShoeva, and the Duchan obviously would be next to the Mizbeach, but the 15 steps were actually built corresponding with the 15 Shir HaMa'alot. Now, what was the story of this Shir HaMa'alot? David HaMelech said them because he wanted to elevate the water of the Tehom, the water of the deeper water sources, bring them 50 levels up. And that's how he said the Shir HaMa'alot, the Shir HaMa'alot. And here, that you want to connect in the Chag HaSukkot, we daven on Mayim, right? And we want the Mayim of the Tehom to be blessed, to be mitbarech. That's one of the simple reasons of why we do Nisuch HaMayim on Chag HaSukkot. And therefore, these 15 levels that you had in the Beit HaMikdash, connecting Ezrat Yisrael and Ezrat Nashim, who were instituted with the 15 Shir HaMa'alot that David HaMelech said to bring the water 50 levels up. Now every year those would be used for saying those very Shirot HaTishbachot that David HaMelech said for the water in the process of the bringing of the water, who would be supposed to be connecting that to the Mayim Shel Tehom. So that's a very beautiful connection right over there. But they would stand at this. Two Kohanim would be standing on Shar HaElyon. Shar HaElyon is another name for Shar Nikanor, right? Which connects Ezrat Yisrael with Ezrat Nashim. When you go up these 15 steps from Ezrat Nashim, the gates that are in front of you is the Shar Nikanor. It's called Shar Nikanor because of the Gemara that we had before, that there was a nest that happened, and therefore when they renovated the Beit HaMikdash, when they became richer, and they made everything out of gold, they didn't change Shar Nikanor, that was made out of the copper. They didn't change it because of the tremendous mess that happened with this in the process of bringing them on a ship, and the ship was sinking, and they threw one of them, and the guy, the Kanor, was standing there. He was the whole way. He was concerned, and he saw miraculously the door. This is massive door. You can imagine how heavy it is, making copper, and it was floating behind the ship, following the ship to Yerushalayim, and that nest that happened, kind of like set the name of Sha'ar Nikanor as that eternal name. But that's Sha'ar Elyon, right? They would go with Sha'ar Elyon, sheyored me'ezrat Yisrael le'ezrat Nashim. So shnei chasosrot b'yedehen. They would have these two trumpets, two chasosrot in their hand. Kara hagever. Well, what's Kara hagever? When the man would call. What's Kara hagever? So this is discussed in Masechet Yuma, also Tafchav, that right prior to Alot HaShachar, right, mamash before Alot HaShachar, one of the Kohanim would be standing up there watching the development of Alot HaShachar, right? He'ir Pnei HaMizrach, at Shemech Hebron. The person that was checking this would actually call upon the Kohanim, Leviim, and Israelim to start the Avodah of the Beit HaMikdash. So you get up, Kohanim, LaAvodatam, Leviim, LeDuchanam, and Israel. Every person that was involved with the Avodah of the Beit HaMikdash would be called basically to stand guard and start the Avodah of the day. That's the Kara Gever. Now, there are Rishonim who say Kara Gever is a Tarnagol, right? That would be like the reading, because that also is right before Alot HaShachar, the roosters would call. But be as it may, Kara Gever, this person would call, and they would start the process. This is slightly before Alot HaShachar, slightly before dawn. They would start this process. Tak'u v'heri'u v'tak'u. They would blow the shofar, t'kiya teruah t'kiya, and they would come down from this 15 steps. They would get to the 10th step. Tak'u v'heri'u v'tak'u. They would blow shofarot, t'kiya teruah t'kiya again a second time, and they would come down. Higiu le'azara. They would actually come to the Karka Azara Ezrat Nashim. Again, Taku ve'eriu v'taku. They would do a third time, and at this point, when they would do it, they would open the gate of Ezrat Nashim, meaning the outer gate, the entrance gate of Ezrat Nashim, that would go down now to Har HaBayit. And says the Gemara, Hayu tok'il v'olchin. This one, they would elongate T'kiya teruah t'kiya azoi, going further, until they would actually go through the entire Ezrat Nashim and get to the gates of Ezrat Nashim, going down to Har HaBayit. They would go out to this Sha'ar HaYotzeh B'Mizrach. This is again the Sha'ar of Ezrat Nashim, is the outer eastern wall of the Azara. That's how you enter from east, facing the west, which will go up and eventually would hit the Mizbeach, hit the Kodesh, and Kodesh Kodashim, which would be all the way in the west. So this is the outer eastern wall of the Azara and the gate of Ezrat Nashim. So once they get to that gate, they don't leave facing east, they would turn to the west. As they exit, they turn their face to the side of the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim, ve'amru, and they would say, Avotenu shayu b'makom hazeh. Our forefathers that were in this place, in Beit Rishon, achorehem elechal. Like the pasuk says, actually the midrashim in Echa, we read every year Tisha B'av, and it's in the psukim as well. They would turn their back to the Hechal, upinehem ketma, and they would face the Mizrach, worshipping the elements, right? They would be mishtachavim ketma leshemesh. They would be bowing eastward, so to speak, towards the Shemesh, and this is by Alot HaShachar, so where the Shemesh is actually coming up, so it's appropriate time actually. They would be getting up and doing Avodah Zarah in this place. Ve'anu, and us, le'yah einenu, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, our eyes are only to you. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Hayu Shonin V'omrim, they would say twice, V'omrim anu leka u'leka einenu. The Gemara is going to explain what exactly it means, the leka mishtachavim. Then we have to discuss this, how it's mutar even to say it twice. We don't want to say modim, modim. The Gemara says in Masechet Brachot that if a person says Shema, Shema, or Modim, Modim, Shatikiroto, you don't want to sound like there's two Reshuyot, there are two different entities, especially because in the time of the Gemara, there were people who felt there were two entities. One of the prevailing ideologies that the Ovda Avodah Zarah in the time of Chazal had was actually the Zoroastrians. This was even older than the Zoroastrians, but the Zoroastrians, we would call them Zartoshtis, right? They were the dominant so-called religion in Bavel and in Paras. They believed in what the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, Hormiz v'Ahorabiz, right? Which is the Koach HaTov v'Koach Hara, the God of good and bad in that way. This was a very, very ancient belief. In Farsi of nowadays, they would call it, it's not nowadays really, but if you study the literature, especially the poetry literature of the old Persian culture, they still have it as Ahriman, which is now even kind of like entered the current literature as Satan, right? They translate another word for Satan, for the Koach Hara, is Ahriman, right? And the source of all good was Ahura Mazda. So the same thing, is just a little different in language of Hormiz v'Ahurabiz that the Gemara talks about. So this was you have to understand, this was the Ramchal talks about this in the arguments of other philosophies, and the early Rishonim of 850 years ago talk about this when they talk about Shara Yichud and so on and so forth in Chovot HaLevavot. But this was a prevailing thing for the Goyim of having these two things. So we are very mindful of not saying Shema Shema or Modim Modim. You have to actually really understand how this worked. But Lemaaseh, that's how they would go. I was thinking I should look into this more diligently and try to find, but I was thinking of the minhag that there is, that has made it to the halachic literature of the Shulchan Aruch and Oseh Kelim, that when you exit the shul, you don't exit kacha with your back to the echal. You turn around and you go backwards, leaving the mikdash. Perhaps has a lot to do with this minhag that this mishnah over here, that we don't want to be achorev lechal, even though that it's not mizrach ma'arav really. It's not that you're facing mizrach and someone is going to think that you're going to be bowing to the thing, but turning your face back as you exit the shul and bowing to the aron, to the echal, is certainly very much aligned with this mishnah. So says now the Gemara, the minute that we have left. Tanu Rabbanan, mi shelo ra'a simchat bit hashoeva lo ra'a simcha miyamav. If you didn't experience Simchat Beit HaShoeva, you haven't seen a Simcha in your life. If you didn't see Yerushalayim in its glory, you haven't seen a beautiful city in your life, right? Hashtag Pesach hotels and Pesach programs and all the Yehopetzvils in the world, right? So it says the Gemara, if you didn't see Beit HaMikdash in its building, you haven't seen a glorified, beautiful, magnificent building in your life. Now, first of all, why is the Tana saying this? Why is the Mishnah? So telling you that still there's hope. You have to yearn for it. You think other things are beautiful. If you haven't seen this, you haven't seen. Now, it sounds like the Chachmei Gemara and Mishnah, they actually had experienced this. So if you haven't seen this, you haven't seen beauty, right? So it's mashma that they actually saw it. right? At least that's how the Achronim, the Maharsha, and others, the Aruch LaNer has questions on this without getting into the nitty-gritties of the details. But it's mashma that they saw it. So the Gemara says, Mahi, which one did they see? Right? Now, the historical factors is obviously Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash. David HaMelech found the place. For 35 years, he gathered tremendous amounts of every beautiful thing that David HaMelech would find, every booty that he took and gathered. He very organized, in an organized fashion, he stored them away, gold, silver, copper, wood, everything. He gathered for his son to have everything ready when he takes over the reign to build the Beit HaMikdash right away, right? And I'm not actually using all these things. That's a separate story for itself. So it was Beit Rishon, then it was Beit Sheni, and then it was Beit Shel Hordus. Hordus renovated the Beit HaMikdash in a magnificent way. And the Gemara is going to actually end up saying over here that what we talk about over here is the binyan of Hordus, what he made. So we'll leave the explanation of the historic and actual factual things of the binyan of Hordus, Be'ezrat Hashem, for the next year.